The ground had been professionally prepared, for Father Angwin was not about to overtax or overestimate his crew. The gravedigger and his assistant had been called in from the cemetery that St. Thomas Aquinas shared with the neighboring parish. The Featherhoftonians did not merit a facility of their own. There had been a discussion heated in the church porch, and after money had changed hands, the two craftsmen had seen the logic of the priest's case. True, they were not employed to dig holes. It was not their vocation. It did not agree with them. For that he might better have employed, as one of them pointed out, a landscape gardener. But given that the holes were grave-shaped, it might be seen as trespassing on their specialty should he retain some other professional. And the holes need not be so deep as graves, so the work would be easy. They had conceded the point and excavated the ground behind the garage. When Father Angwin saw the holes, he clasped his arms across his chest, hugging behind his soutane and nameless floating anxiety. What he saw was a graveyard prepared for some coming massacre or atrocity, and he said to himself, as clever children always say, if God knows our ends, why cannot he prevent them? Why is the world so full of malice and cruelty? Why did God make it all? Why did God make it at all and give us free will if he knows already that some of us will destroy ourselves in exercising it? Then he remembered that he did not believe in God, and he went into the church to supervise the removal of the statues from their plinths. Father Angwin had himself a good knowledge of the principles of levers and pulleys, but it was Sister Philomena who, by example, spurred the men's fellowship on to the effort needed. By the time the statues were out of doors and the men had coiled their ropes and picked up their shovels, the scent of her skin had seeped to them through her heavy black habit, and they edged away their celibate frames, shaken by what they did not understand. She was a big, healthy girl in her woolen stockings. You were conscious of the smell of soap from her skin, of her eyebrows, and of her feet, and of other parts you do not notice on nuns. It was possible to think of her having knees. Sister Philomena lifted her skirts a fraction to kneel on the damp ground, watching intently as the saints were lowered into the earth. At the last moment, she leant forward and skimmed her rough housewife's hand across the mane of St. Jerome's lion. Then she eased herself back, settled on her haunches, and drew the back of her hand across her eyes. I liked him, Father, she said, looking up. He put out a hand to assist her. She rose smoothly and stood beside him, tipping back her head so that her veil dropped itself over her shoulder into its proper folds. Her hand was warm and steady, and he felt the slow beat of her pulse through the skin. You are a good girl, he said, a good girl I could not have managed. I am too sad. Philomena raised her voice to the men's fellowship, who were teetering and swaying one-legged, black flamingos scraping off their shoes. You all gentlemen should go to the Nissen hut now. Sister Anthony has got the tea urn out and is baking you some fruit loaf. At this news, the men looked cast down. Sister Anthony, a rotund and beaming figure in her flowery apron, was feared throughout the parish. Poor old soul, Father Angwin said. She means well. Think of the good sisters. They have to face it every day. Breakfast, dinner, and tea. Do this last one thing for me, lads, and if it is very unpalatable, you must offer it up. There's not more than a handful of grit in it, Philomena said, though possibly more grit than currants. You can offer it up, as Father says. Make it an occasion of obtaining grace. Say, Sacred Heart of Jesus, help me to eat this fruit bread. Is that what you say? Father Angwin asked her. I mean, mutatis mutandis, with suitable adaptation. For instance, I believe she burns the porridge. Holy Mary, Mother of God, help me swallow this porridge. Sister Polycarp suggested we might make a novena to St. Michael, the patron saint of grocers, to ask them to guide her a little in the foodstuffs line. We wondered if it was the patron saint of cooks we should apply to, but Sister Polycarp said her problem is more basic than that. It is what she can do with the raw ingredients that God alone knows. And do you all have some pious formula? Oh, yes, but we say it under our breath, not to hurt her feelings. Except Mother Perpetua, of course. She gives her a pious rebuke. I'll bet she does. But Sister Anthony is very humble. She never says anything back. Why should she? She has her means of revenge. The moon had risen now, a sliver of light over the black terraces. Judd McAvoy, a singular figure in his knitted waistcoat, gave a pat to the earth above St. Agatha. Judd, said Father Angwin, I did not see you there. Oh, I have been toiling, Judd McAvoy said, toiling unobtrusively. No reason, Father, why you should remark my presence above the others. No, but I generally do, Father Angwin turned away. Philomena saw the puzzlement on his face. I like to know where you are, Judd, he remarked to himself, and louder. Are you going to cut along with the others and get your fruit bread? I shall go directly, said Judd. I should not like to be marked out in any way. He knocked the earth off his spade and straightened up. I think you may say, Father, that all your saints are safely buried. Shall I take it upon myself to draw up a plan marking the name of each, in case the bishop should change his mind and wish to reinstate some of them? That will not be necessary, Father Angwin shifted from foot to foot. I myself will remember. I will not be in any doubt. As you please, McAvoy said. He smiled his cold smile and put on his hat. I will join the others then. The men's fellowship, edified by the words of the remarkable young nun, were touching their foreheads to Father Angwin and setting off in ones and twos down the drive towards the school. Their murmur arose through the scented evening. Sacred Heart of Jesus, help me to eat this fruit bread. Father Angwin watched them go. McAvoy went with the rest, casting a glance behind him. When finally he rounded the bend by the convent and was lost to view, Sister Philomena heard the priest let out his breath and noted the relief on his face. Come into the church a moment, Father Angwin said. She nodded and followed him. They entered together through the deep shadows that had gathered in the porch. A chill struck upwards from the stone floor into their feet. Clods of earth lay in the aisles. I will see to this tomorrow, Philomena said, her tone low and subdued. They looked about. Without the statues, the church seemed smaller and meaner, its angles more gracelessly exposed. You would think it would be the other way around, Philomena said, catching his thought, that it would look bigger, not that it isn't big enough. Yet I remember when I was a girl and my Aunt Dymphna died. And when we got all the stuff out into the yard, her bed and the chest and all, we went back in to take a last look at it, and the room was like the size of a hen coop. My mother said, Dear God, did my sister Dymphna and all her fancy frocks live in this little space? What did she die of? Dymphna? Oh, her lungs. It was a damp place that she lived, on a farm. They whispered as they were speaking of the dead. Philomena bowed her head, and a sharp picture came into the priest's mind of the decaying thatch of her aunt's cottage and of chickens who enjoyed comparatively such liberty, scratching up the sacred soil of Ireland under a sky packed with rain-swollen clouds. It was the day of Dymphna's funeral he was seeing, a coffin being put into a cart. I trust she is at peace, he said. I doubt it. She was a byword in her day. She used to go round the cattle fairs and strike up with men. God rest her. You are a curious young woman, Father Angwin said, looking up at her. You have put pictures in my head. I wish you could see the end of this, Philomena said. I feel sad myself, Father. Weighed upon, somehow. I like the little lion. Is it true that there is to be a curate? So the bishop tells me. I have heard nothing more from him. I expect the fellow will just turn up. Well, he will be able to see that you have done as you were directed. It is rather poor what remains. She walked away from him towards the altar, stopping to genuflect with a thoughtful, slow reverence. May I light a candle, Father? You may if you have a match. Otherwise, there's nothing to light it from. A dim outline in the center aisle, she reached into the deep pocket of her habit, took out a box of matches, struck one, and picked a new candle from the wooden box beneath the statue of the Virgin. When the wick kindled, she shielded the flame with her palm and held the candle up above her head. The point of light wavered and grew and bathed the statue's face. Her nose is chipped. Yes, Father Angwin spoke from the darkness behind her. I wonder if you could see your way to doing anything about it. I am not of an artistic bent. Plasticine, Philomena said. I can get some from the children. Then no doubt we could paint it. Let us go, Father Angwin said. Agnes has cooked some undercut for my supper, and besides, this spectacle is too melancholy. Not more melancholy than the supper that awaits me. I fear it may be the fruit bread. I should like to ask you to join me, Father Angwin said, on account of the comradeship occasioned by our night's work. But I think I should have to telephone the bishop to ask him for dispensation of some sort, and no doubt he would have to apply to Rome. I will face the fruit bread, Philomena said calmly. As they left the church, he thought that a hand brushed his arm. Dimphna's bar parlor laugh came faintly from the terraces. Her tipsy, Guinness-sodden breath, stopped by earth these 11 years, filled the summer night. Chapter 3. Soon after the school term ended, the mills closed for Wakes Week, and those of the populace who could afford it went to spend a week in boarding houses at Blackpool. It was a poor summer on the whole, with many lives lost. The thunderstorms and gales of 27 July returned 2 days later. Trees were felled and roofs blown away. On 5 August, there were more thunderstorms and the rivers rose. On 15 August, 2 trains collided in Blackburn Station, injuring 50 people. On 26 August, there were further fatalities after violent electrical storms. In early September, the children went back to school. A new intake of infants cowered under the mossy wall and sought refuge in its shade from Mother Perpetua's crow-like arm. It was after 9 o'clock on a particularly wet evening late in that month that Miss Dempsey heard a knock at the front door of the presbytery. She took this ill because it was usual for the petitioners, if in need of a priest, to come to the kitchen door at the side. The nuns similarly knew their place. She had not yet fed Father Angwin his evening meal, for it was the night of the Children of Mary's meeting, and Father had been obliged to give them an improving address. The meeting had gone much as always. There had been prayers, and Father Angwin's discourse more rambling than usual. The thought, then a hymn to St. Agnes, protectress of the society. There were several such hymns, all of them absurdly flattering to the saint, and Miss Dempsey, on account of her Christian name, was forced to endure both pointed disregard and scornful stares. While the verses lurched on, the other children could not bear to hear her so lauded. We'll sing a hymn to Agnes, the martyr child of Rome, the virgin spouse of Jesus, more pure than ocean foam. Miss Dempsey tried during the weekly meetings. Indeed, she hoped she always did try to look humble and inconspicuous, not to flaunt her status in the parish. But she felt from the gimlet glances she received that she was failing. Oh, aid us, Holy Agnes, a joyous song to raise, to trumpet forth thy glory, to sound afar thy praise. Father Angwin said he liked this particular hymn, did he not? He said he liked the thought of the Children of Mary blowing trumpets, but a small sigh escaped him just the same. After the concluding prayers, the other children were at liberty to go to the school hall to conduct the social part of their business. Strong tea, parlor games, and character assassination. She herself, knowing her duty, had taken off her cloak at the back of the church, handed it to the president of the sodality, taken off her ribbon and her medal, and hurried through the sacristy and back into her kitchen. She was aware that this proceeding gave the children every opportunity to shred her reputation. But that could not be helped. On a bad night like this, Father was not to be left with a sandwich. So who can this possibly be at the door, she wondered. She took off her penny and hung it up. Perhaps someone is near death and their sorrowing relatives are here to ask Father to come and give extreme unction. Perhaps even one of the Children of Mary has met with an accident. A fatal scalding with the tea urn was always a possibility. Or perhaps she thought it is some poor sinner with blood on his hands, ridden over the wild moors to ask for absolution. But glancing up at the clock, she knew this could not be, for the last bus from Glossop had passed through 20 minutes earlier. Miss Dempsey opened the door a crack. There was a bluish wild darkness outside. and rain rattled past her into the hall. Before her was a tall, dim shape, a man wrapped in a dark cloak, holes for mouth and eyes, a hat pulled over the brow. Then, as her eyes became accustomed to the exterior murk, she distinguished the figure of a young man holding in his left hand what appeared to be a doctor's black bag. "Fludd," said the apparition. "Indeed it is, a flood and a half." "No," he said. "F-L-U-D-D." A gust of wind ripped at the trees behind him, their branches fitfully lit by the storm flickering over Netherhofton, stretched across his tilted cheek in a tracery like fingers or lace. "Is this the time for a spelling bee?" Miss Dempsey flung back the door. "Do you really consider it is?" The young man stepped inside. Rivulets of water cascaded from his clothes and pooled on the floor of the hall. He fixed her with his gaze and peeled off his outer layers to reveal a black suit and clerical collar. "My name," he said. "F-L-U-D-D. My name is Fludd." "So you are the curate," she thought. She felt a sudden urge to say M-U-D-D. "Mine, Father, is mud." Then his eyes fastened upon her face. The urge reached her lips and died. The night chill crept into her from the open door, and as she went to close it, she began to tremble, and she clamped her jaws to stop her teeth from chattering audibly. Too much shivering was a vulgar thing, she felt, and would give a bad impression. "Excuse me," she said. "I'll draw the bolts. It's time. Quite late. You'll not be wanting to go out again tonight." She did it. She felt the young man's eyes on her back when she turned the key in the lock. "No," he said, I won't want to go out again. I've come to stay." Deep within her, behind her cardigan and her blouse and her petticoat trimmed with scratchy nylon lace, behind her interlocked vest and freckled skin, Miss Dempsey sensed a slow movement, a tiny spiral shift of matter, as if, at the very moment the curate spoke, a change had occurred, a change so minute as to baffle description, but rippling out in its effect to infinity. In later years, when she talked about it, she would always say, "Did you ever see a pile of pennies pushed over? Did you ever see a house of cards fall down?" And whomever she spoke to would look at her, comprehension strained. She could not find the words for that sliding, slipping, tripping sensation that she felt through her entire body. Miss Dempsey felt her mortality, but in the same instant she felt her immortality too. At that instant also, Father Angwin put his head around the sitting room door. There could be no mistake about the newcomer, for he had already assumed a proprietorial air, taking off his sodden hat and setting it down on the hall stand and extracting himself from his cloak. A look of alarm and distaste crossed Father Angwin's face, then stronger emotions. As Miss Dempsey was to tell a parishioner next day, I really thought for a moment he might fly out against him. She saw the priest stand poised on the threshold of the room, his frail person quivering, a dangerous golden light in his eyes. A tune began to run through her head, not of a hymn. Despite herself, she began to hum, and a moment later was appalled to hear herself break into song. John Peel's view halloo would awaken the dead, or the fox from his lair in the morning. "This is Miss Dempsey, my housekeeper," Father Angwin said. "She is deranged." Before she could make any apology, she saw Father Fludd reach into the inside pocket of his black suit. She waited, her fingers nervously pressed to her lips for the newcomer to produce some papers, a scroll perhaps, embossed with the papal seal, some document excommunicating Father Angwin for drunkenness and peculiar behavior, and installing this young man in his stead. But the curate's hand emerged with a small flat tin. He held it out to Father Angwin and inquired, "Have a cheroot?" For the rest of that evening, Miss Dempsey went up and downstairs, providing as best she could for the curate's comfort. He said he would take a bath, which was not at all a usual thing on a weeknight. The bathroom, one of the few in Featherhofton at that time, was as cold as a morgue, and the hot water a rusty, unreliable trickle. Miss Dempsey penetrated the frigid upper story of the house, a threadbare towel over her arm, and then walked again with bed linen, Irish linen sheets that were thin and starched and icy to her touch. She looked out a hot water bottle and went into the curate's room to draw the curtains and to pass a duster over the small bedside stand and to turn the mattress. There are those, it is said, who have entertained angels unawares, but Miss Dempsey would have liked notice. Every week she cleaned this room, but naturally the bed was not aired. There was no homely touch that she could provide unless she had brought up a bucket of coal and laid a fire. But she could never remember seeing a fire in a bedroom, and it was better not to encourage any notions that the curate might have. She had somehow formed the idea, just by those first few moments of conversation, and by his elaborate unconcern about her singing, that besides being a priest, he was a gentleman. It was an impression only given by his manners and not his appearance, for the light in the hall was too dim for her to get much idea of what he looked like. The walls of the upper story, like the walls of the kitchen and the downstairs hall, were painted a deep institutional green. The paneled doors were varnished with a yellowish stain. There was no lampshade in the curate's room, just a clear bulb and the hard-edged shadows it cast. The floorboards creaked in the corridor, and Miss Dempsey stopped, rocking a little on her feet, detecting the point of the greatest noise. Downstairs, the floors were made of stone. In every room, a crucifix hung, the dying God in each case exhibiting some distinction of anguish, some greater or lesser contortion of his naked body, a musculature more or less racked. The house was a prison for these dying Christs, a mausoleum. But when Miss Dempsey thought of the bishop's house, she imagined table lamps with silk shades and dining tables on pedestals, and an effulgence of hot electric air. When she thought of the sycophants, she imagined them lolling on cushions, eating Brazil nuts. She imagined that they got food and sauces and port wine on quite ordinary days, and rinsed their fingers in holy water in little marble basins, that in the grounds of the bishop's house, where the sycophants walked together plotting in Latin, there were fountains and statuary and a dovecote. Crossing the hall, she paused outside the sitting room door. She heard conversation in full spate. She could tell that Father Angwin had been drinking whiskey. The curate spoke in his light, dry voice. Quote, "In considering the life of Christ, there is something that has often made me wonder. Did the man who owned the Gadarene swine get compensation?" End of quote. In considering the life of Christ, there is something that has often made me wonder. Did the man who owned the Gadarene swine get compensation? Miss Dempsey tiptoed away. The curate moved his hand over the tablecloth in a skimming motion, sweeping the topic aside. His fingers, bloodless, pointed fingers, floated over the linen like swans on a lake of milk. "I thought you might be one of those modern fellows," Father Angwin said. "I thought you might have no scholarship. I was sick to think about it." Father Fludd looked down with an inward modest smile as if disclaiming any pretensions. He had been drinking too, but he was certainly not drunk. Despite the hour, and it was now 11 o'clock, he was as pleasant, mild and breezy as if it were tea time. Whenever Father Angwin looked up at him, it seemed that his whiskey glass was raised to his lips. But the level of what was in it did not seem to go down. And yet from time to time the young man reached out for the bottle and topped himself up. It had been the same with their late dinner. There were 3 sausages from the co-op butcher on Father Fludd's plate. And he was always cutting into one or other and spearing a bit on his fork. He was always chewing in an unobtrusive, polite way with his mouth shut tight. And yet there were always 3 sausages on his plate, until at last, quite suddenly, there were none. Father Angwin's first thought was that Fludd had a small dog concealed about his person, in the way that starlets conceal their pooches from the customs men. He had seen this in the newspaper, but Fludd, unlike the starlets, had not got his neck sunk into a fur. And then again, Father Angwin thought, would a dog drink so much whiskey? From time to time, also, the curate leaned forward and busied himself building up the fire. He was a handy type with the tongs, Father Angwin could tell. His efforts were keeping the room remarkably warm, and yet, when Agnes came in, lugging a bucket of coal, she checked herself in surprise and said, "You don't need this." Presently, Father Angwin got up and opened the window a crack. "It makes a change for this house," he said, "but it's as hot as hell." "Though far better ventilated," said Fludd, sipping his whiskey. "It's time they had cocoa," Miss Dempsey thought. "They'll be tumbling under the table. The bishop will have chosen this toper to lead poor Angwin on." He had a good head for drink, that was for sure, and no doubt when Angwin had passed out, he would be tiptoeing into the hall and lifting the receiver on his special telephone line to his corpulence. And yet Miss Dempsey was not sure what to think. That look he had given her in the hall, was it not, for all its chilling nature, a look of deep compassion? Could it be that Fludd was not a sycophant, but some innocent that the bishop wished to ruin? She felt that look still, as if her flesh had become glass. "I'll sing again," she thought, to impress on him that if I'm given to singing, it's usually something pious. "I'll just hum as I take in his tray." She spread on the tray a white cloth with a scalloped edge, embroidered with a satin-stitch pansies, which she had purchased in June at the parish sale of work. It looked, she thought, more pure than ocean foam. She placed the cups of cocoa upon it, and then 2 plates, and on each plate 3 rich tea biscuits. "To Christ thy heart was given, the world pursued in vain." She knocked. No reply, of course. They were talking again. "Its promises ne'er moved thee." She shoved open the door with her foot and maneuvered herself in. The heat took her aback. The fire was roaring up the chimney. She lost the thread of her verse. The curate looked up at her and smiled as she put the tray on the table, and she looked back full into his face. This time, she thought, I must be sure and form some notion of what he looks like. She held his gaze for what length of time she could, without appearing to stare, and then bent over the hearth, touching the tiles up quite needlessly with the little gilt brush from the fireside set. She surprised herself. She usually brought in a filthy, bristly kitchen type of brush for this job, and at the thought of anyone violating the fireside set, she would have spat. She waited for Father Angwin to say, as he usually did, "These are boring biscuits. I like fig. I like custard creams," but he was entirely caught up in his conversation with the curate. his hands knotting and unknotting on the table, a flurry of agitation in his voice. I try to tell myself that whatever evil is done permetto Dei, with God's sanction. I understand, said the curate gravely. And certainly Augustine argues most persuasively in The City of God that though good can exist without evil, evil cannot exist without good. And yet the feeling has taken hold of me that the devil has got his independence in this world. It is he who has got the reins in his hands, I feel. Damn. Shit. I'm going to reread those last two. She waited for Father Anguin to say, as he usually did, these are boring biscuits. I like fig, I like custard creams, but he was entirely caught up in his conversation with the curate, his hands knotting and unknotting on the table, a flurry of agitation in his voice. Quote, I try to tell myself that whatever evil is done permetto Dei, with God's sanction. End of quote. Quote, I understand, end of quote, said the curate gravely. Quote, and certainly Augustine argues most persuasively in The City of God that though good can exist without evil, evil cannot exist without good. And yet the feeling has taken hold of me that the devil has got his independence in this world. It is he who has got the reins in his hands, I feel. Father Fludd stirred his cocoa judiciously. His eyes were downcast. I'll come in for the tray, Agnes said. I like to get washed up before bedtime, Father. If there's one thing I cannot abide, it's to see dirty pots first thing in the morning. I think it's a habit low in the extreme. I don't know where God is, Father Anguin said. I don't know that he is. Drink it while it's hot, Agnes said to him, and don't get yourself worked up before bedtime. But Father Anguin was not listening to her. He looked through her, as if he were not seeing her, and for a moment she felt an uprush of fear, like cold water on the back of her neck. What if she were really not visible? What if Father Fludd had disappeared her in some way? The next moment her good sense reasserted itself. She went out into the hall humming, all vain the wooer's pleading, all vain the judge's ire, one love alone thy bosom, inflamed with chastest fire. Was not bosom a rude word? But you were always getting it in hymns. Miss Dempsey had no terms at all for some sections of her anatomy. She never paid them attention. As men go to a banquet, she tried to remember what Father Fludd looked like, but the pattern of his features had been cleanly erased from her mind. So one morning, Father Anguin went on, I woke up. This was 20 years ago. It had gone in the night. I see, said Father Fludd. How can you explain that? I had it at night, and in the morning it had gone. I felt for the first quarter of an hour that it might come to light in the way you know. You might kick your slippers under the bed or be absent-minded with your toothbrush. Father Fludd leant forward. They had transferred themselves now to the two armchairs and sat at either side of the fire. Did you apply to St. Anthony? You know, he is the non-peril for finding what is lost. How could I? Father Anguin threw out his hands in a large and liberal gesture of despair. How could I, considering the nature of my loss? Apply to Anthony or any other saint? I suppose not, Fludd said. There are some losses. Virginity, for instance, that St. Anthony could do nothing about. But you would not be debarred from asking him if you were an optimist. Your situation, it seems to me, was more grave than the loss of virginity. What did you do next? I looked in the wardrobe, I think. I got up. It was 5 o'clock, still dark. And I went and looked in the sacristy. I opened the press up and felt among the vestments. I knew there was no chance, but you can imagine how it was. I was half out of my mind with fear of the future. And then I looked on the altar. It wasn't there. It had vanished while I slept, and I had to accept the fact. Father Angwin's head drooped. I had lost my faith. I no longer believed in God at all. You relive the moment, Fludd said, as if it were yesterday. May I ask what you did next? Father Angwin placed his hands together, fingertip to fingertip. He considered. It seemed to me that what I had urgent need of was some kind of survival plan, some kind of strategy. I wondered, is there a diocesan house of detention for priests? In my case, somewhere they are put to be kept from view. After all, you cannot stop being a priest, can you? No matter how faithless or scandalous a man is, once he is a priest for all eternity. I couldn't abscond, could I? I couldn't do a moonlight flit. I should say your way is plain, Fludd said. A man may preserve the outward form if he lacks the inward grace. Yes, so I thought. Well, I have no faith. I must just pretend I have. And may I venture a guess? You had a parish, it must be served, and yet you would feel what? On shaky ground. Suppose you made a slip, gave yourself away. I was a charlatan, Father Angwin said. I was a charlatan, Father Angwin said, a pretender, a fake. Do you know what worried me? That I would stop thinking like a priest, stop talking like a priest, that one day some parishioner would come at me with some question. Is this or that a sin? Should I do that or the other? And I'd say, well, what do you think? What do you feel like doing? What does your common sense tell you? Common sense has nothing to do with religion, Father Fludd said reprovingly. And personal opinion has little to do with sin. Exactly, just my point. I was afraid I'd forget myself, respond as any person might, appeal, as it were, to the human and not the divine. I had to safeguard myself against this grievous peril. So did you then become scrupulous? Did you become exacting? Fludd leant forward in his chair, his eyes alight. Did you make a point of it to become known in the district for the strictness of your opinions, for your old-fashioned stances, for the rigidity of your views? You would not hear of any innovation, deviation, of any slight departure from the rules of Lenten fasting, say. You would not remit a jot or a tittle. That is about the size of it. Father Angwin looked morose. He slumped a little. Any more in that bottle? Fludd had secreted it by his chair, it seemed. He reached down and poured his senior a generous measure. Wonderful, Father Angwin murmured. Go on, Father Fludd. You seem to be on my trail.